It's strange how silence can feel heavier than sound. Up in the Appalachians, it presses down on you like mist, thick, ancient, alive. That morning, I remember waking to that kind of silence. No birds, no wind, just the breathing of four people in a cabin that wasn't supposed to exist. My name's Aaron, 32 years old, born and raised not far from Asheville. I've been hiking these mountains since I was a kid, chasing trails, chasing solitude. But that night on Mount Mitchell, I realized solitude can sometimes chase you back. We weren't supposed to stay overnight. The plan was simple: camp by the ridge, cook a small meal, and head back by dusk. But the weather had other ideas. By late afternoon, the fog rolled in so thick that the trail vanished beneath our boots. The forest shifted like it always does when you realize you've gone too far without looking back. That's when Emma spotted the structure through the trees. A cabin. Weather-beaten, slate roof caved in on one corner. A front porch sagging like it was tired of standing. It shouldn't have been there. None of the maps showed it, and the locals we'd talked to never mentioned one this high up. I remember stepping onto that porch and feeling the boards flex beneath my boots. There was a smell. Pine, rot, and something faintly metallic. Inside, the air was colder, heavier. Dust hung in the light of our flashlights, floating like tiny ghosts. The cabin had one room, a stone fireplace, and two doors, one front, one back. Nothing else. We checked the corners, opened drawers, cleared a space for our sleeping bags. It wasn't ideal, but it was shelter, and when you're stuck on a mountain in October fog, you take what you can get. By midnight, the wind had started again, low and hollow, like it was moving through empty tunnels beneath the earth. I woke first. My watch said 2:46 a.m. Everyone else was asleep, Emma on my left, Jason and Cole on the far side of the fire. But something was off. The cabin felt different. I couldn't place it at first, but the light from the fire looked wrong, stretching further than it should. That's when I saw it. An opening behind the fireplace. A doorway. A room that hadn't been there when we arrived. I stared at it, convinced my tired mind was playing tricks. The firelight spilled into that space like water finding a crack, revealing stone walls, a dirt floor, and what looked like a table made from raw timber. I remember whispering Emma's name. She stirred, blinked, and sat up. The confusion in her face told me I wasn't imagining it. Jason woke next, then Cole, all of us staring at the same impossible thing. No one said a word for what felt like minutes. Finally, Jason grabbed the flashlight and walked toward it. The beam of light cut through the dark, shaking in his hand. The room was small, maybe 10 feet across, but there was something carved into the far wall. Lines, circles, symbols that looked like they'd been burned into the stone. None of us recognized them. The air inside that room was colder than outside, and the smell, I still remember that smell. It was the same metallic tang, stronger now like blood that had dried long ago. Cole muttered that it was just an old storage space, maybe used by trappers or rangers years back. But even he didn't believe his own words. I saw the way his jaw tightened when he said it. We argued quietly about whether to leave or wait until dawn. The fog outside still pressed against the windows like a living thing. In the end, we decided to stay put, all of us too tired and too scared to face the dark woods. I must have fallen asleep again, because the next thing I remember is Emma shaking me awake. The fire was low, just glowing embers. "Aaron," she whispered, "the room's gone." I sat up fast. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. She was right. The wall behind the fireplace was solid stone again, cold and blank. No door, no opening, no trace that it had ever existed. Jason and Cole woke to our voices, confusion giving way to disbelief. Jason ran his hand over the stone, pressed against it, even kicked it once. Nothing. It was as if the mountain had swallowed the space whole. We packed our things before sunrise, each of us avoiding the other's eyes. None of us said it out loud, but we all felt it. The cabin was wrong. As we stepped outside, the fog thinned just enough to see the ridgeline. The air was sharp, brittle with morning cold. But when I turned back, something twisted in my gut. The cabin looked different. The roofline was steeper, the porch gone. Even the color of the wood had changed, darker, older. like it had aged decades overnight. We didn't stop walking until we hit the main trail. The sun was up by then, and the forest looked ordinary again. Golden light spilling between trunks, the sound of birds returning like nothing had happened. At the ranger station later that morning, we told the story half laughing, trying to sound casual. But the ranger didn't laugh. He just stared at us, then asked where exactly we'd found the cabin. When we showed him the coordinates, he frowned. "There's no structure up there," he said quietly. "There used to be, though, years back. Burned down in the 1950s. Lightning strike. 3 hikers were found inside. They said the same thing you just did." No one spoke after that. The silence in the truck on the way home was suffocating. Jason stared out the window, pale. Cole rubbed his hands together over and over, like he was trying to wash something invisible off his skin. Emma wouldn't look at me. When I finally broke the silence, I said what we were all thinking. Some places aren't meant to be found twice. I went back once, months later. Alone. I needed to see it again, to prove to myself that it had all been a trick of exhaustion, fog, and fear. I hiked the same route, traced the same steps, but when I reached the ridge, the clearing was gone. No trail markers, no sign of disturbance, just trees and moss and silence. The GPS said I was standing exactly where the cabin had been. I waited there until sunset, the air growing cold around me, the woods too still. Then, faintly, I heard it, the creak of wood, like an old door moving slowly on its hinges. It came from somewhere behind me, deeper in the forest. I turned, but there was nothing, no structure, no sound, just the hush of wind moving through bare branches. And yet I knew that if I stayed long enough, the mountain might show me again what it wanted me to see. That's the thing about the Appalachians. They don't just hold history, they breathe it. Every inch of earth here remembers what's been lost. Sometimes it remembers too vividly, and sometimes it lets you step inside that memory. When people ask me now why I keep hiking, why I keep returning to the deep woods after what happened, I tell them this, because fear isn't a warning, it's an invitation. Out there, where the mist crawls low and the night presses close, you learn that the world is larger than what daylight allows you to see. You learn that there are places where time folds, where footsteps echo long after you've gone, where cabins appear for those who aren't supposed to find them. And when dawn comes, if you're lucky, you'll walk away with nothing more than a story. But sometimes, the mountain keeps something from you. A piece of your certainty, a thread of your courage, the whisper that you might, one day, go back. And maybe that's the lesson. Not everything hidden in the woods wants to harm you, but it does want to be remembered. The symbols haunted me for months. I'd wake in the middle of the night and see them again, those black circles and jagged lines scorched into the stone, shifting behind my eyelids like something alive. I sketched them out one morning before sunrise, just to prove to myself I still remembered. The patterns didn't make sense. 3 concentric circles, broken at the edge, with a mark like an arrow pointing inward. It felt more like a warning than a message. I didn't tell Emma or the others. We'd stopped talking about that night completely. Jason moved to another state, said he needed distance. Cole deleted every photo from the trip. Emma blocked me after I sent her the sketches. Maybe they were right to move on, but I couldn't. Something about that room, its sudden existence, the way it disappeared like breath in cold air, wouldn't let me go. It was like the mountain had whispered something I wasn't supposed to hear. And now I was carrying it with me everywhere. A few weeks later, I went to a small museum in Burnsville, a local history spot that collected old maps, mining tools, and journals from early Appalachian settlers. The curator was a quiet man, gray beard, heavy eyes, the kind of person who spoke softly as if the walls were listening. When I showed him the sketch, he stared for a long time before saying, "That's not the first time I've seen that." He led me to a locked display case near the back. Inside was a water-stained notebook, its pages brittle, its cover stamped with the year 1949. The curator opened it carefully, flipping to a page filled with the same symbols I'd drawn. "This belonged to a man named Walter Green," he said, A surveyor who disappeared near Mount Mitchell in 1950. The rangers found his pack, but not him. This was inside. My hands went cold. I read the entry written beneath the drawings. Room behind the hearth. Smell of rust. Circles burned into stone. They said the cabin moves when the mountain forgets. That line, when the mountain forgets, stuck in my mind like a splinter. The curator didn't have much more to say. He told me Green had been working on a geological study, documenting rock formations and underground streams. They found traces of iron near the ridge, he added. Locals used to think that metal in the ground could mess with compasses, even twist up your sense of direction. But you saw something else, didn't you? I didn't answer him. Because how do you explain to someone that a cabin appeared out of fog, grew an extra room in the middle of the night, and erased itself by dawn? That night, I drove back toward the mountain. Not to climb, not to camp, just to be near it. The road wound higher, the headlights carving tunnels through the mist. I pulled over near an overlook where you could see the valley spread out like a sea of black trees. The air was heavy with pine and rain. Somewhere out there, I knew that cabin still existed, whether in this world or between it. I thought about Green, about the 3 hikers the ranger mentioned, about us. Each of us had gone into those woods searching for something simple. Rest, adventure, maybe quiet, and instead found something ancient, waiting. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that the mountain hadn't chosen us by accident. It showed itself to those who stayed too long, who listened too hard. When I finally drove home, the wind picked up behind me, howling through the trees like it was calling something back. And that's when it hit me. What if that room wasn't meant to hold people, but memories? What if every time someone vanished, the mountain didn't destroy them, it kept them? Like pages in a book it didn't want to finish? I started digging into every missing person report around Mount Mitchell from the past century. Most were mundane, lost hikers, storms, exposure. But a few mentioned strange details, reports of cabins that didn't appear on maps, structures seen one day and gone the next, doors that led nowhere. I found a pattern. Every 20 to 30 years, someone documented something that shouldn't have been there. Always around the same ridge, always at night. The last entry before us was 1982. A pair of campers reported a low hum from inside the walls. They left before dawn and never found the cabin again. I knew what I had to do, not for thrill, not for proof, just for understanding. I gathered what little I had. Old survey maps, Green's copied notes, my sketches. And when the calendar hit October again, I went back, alone. This time, I didn't bring a tent. I didn't even plan to sleep. I followed the same trail until fog began to wrap around the trees, the same way it had that first night. The forest was quiet, too quiet. My compass needle jerked once, then froze, pointing east. I walked until I saw it, the same cabin, rising from the mist as if it had been waiting. The porch was whole again, the roof unbroken, the door still cracked open. My breath caught in my throat. I stepped inside. The air was colder than I remembered, like the room itself hadn't been breathed in for decades. The fireplace was there, the stones dark and damp, and behind it the wall was already split open. The room had returned. I shined my flashlight inside. The carvings were fresh again, sharper, deeper. But this time there was something else on the floor, a small rusted compass, its glass cracked. I bent down and turned it over. On the back, carved faintly into the metal, were 2 initials, W.G. Walter Green. For a moment, I couldn't move. My hand trembled as I held that compass, realizing I was standing in the same place where he must have stood 75 years ago. The same silence, the same smell, the same impossible geometry of the mountain's memory. Then I heard it, the creak of the porch behind me. Soft, slow, deliberate. My flashlight flickered once. I turned, expecting to see nothing. But the doorway to the main cabin was gone. The opening had closed behind me, sealing me inside that narrow stone space. The air grew thick, the smell of iron filled my lungs. I don't know how long I stood there, heart pounding, the darkness pressing against my skin. Then, as suddenly as it came, the fear broke, like a wave receding. The wall behind me cracked open again, revealing the cabin just as it had been. The fire was lit, glowing steady, though I hadn't touched it. And for a split second, I thought I saw shapes moving beyond the flame. Not ghosts, not people, echoes, like reflections caught in glass. They were watching me the way the mountain does. Not unkind, not angry, just aware. When I stepped outside, the fog had lifted. The sun was crawling up over the ridge. My watch read 5:25 a.m. The cabin was gone by the time I turned around. Just trees, just silence, just the mountain, breathing. I never found that compass again. But sometimes, when I hike the ridges at dawn, I hear the same low hum beneath the wind, like the earth remembering. Maybe the mountain never forgets. Maybe it just waits, patiently, for someone willing to listen long enough to hear its story. Because out there, beyond the trail and beyond reason, the woods don't just keep secrets, they become them. And if you ever find a cabin that wasn't supposed to be there, don't open the door behind the fireplace. The mountain remembers you longer than you think. There's something about the mountains that teaches you humility, not the kind that comes from awe, but the kind born from realizing how small you truly are in the eyes of something ancient. After that morning on Mount Mitchell, I stopped trying to make sense of what I saw. Logic doesn't survive up there. The deeper you go, the more it strips you down until all that's left is instinct and memory. People like to say the woods are peaceful. They use words like escape, freedom, silence. But silence isn't always kind. Sometimes it's heavy. Sometimes it's the sound of something older than you thinking. The mountains don't care about our questions or our fears. They just keep breathing. Slow, patient, endless. You either learn to breathe with them or you leave. For a long time, I thought that night had taken something from me. Sleep, trust, maybe even a part of my mind. But the more I hiked, the more I realized it had given me something too. It taught me to listen to the crack of branches that mean nothing and the ones that mean everything, to the way fog carries whispers you can't quite translate, to the pulse of the earth beneath your boots, steady and indifferent. The mountain doesn't reveal its secrets out of cruelty. It reveals them to remind you that you are temporary, fragile, passing through. There's a reason locals say the woods here are alive. They're not talking about animals or plants. They mean the land itself feels things. Regret, grief, memory. The ground holds echoes of every footstep ever taken upon it, every scream that got lost between the ridges, every fire that burned too bright and too long, and maybe sometimes it lets those echoes take shape again, just to see if we're still listening. I go back every year now, not to find the cabin, but to pay respect to it. There's a clearing near where I think it once stood. I leave a small pile of stones there each time, nothing grand, just a marker to say I remember. Sometimes I think I feel warmth rising from beneath the earth when I do. Other times, it's colder than winter. Either way, I stand there until the light changes and the forest exhales as if acknowledging me back. When people ask why I keep doing this, why I still walk into places that make others turn back, I tell them it's because every trail is a conversation. The mountain speaks first in beauty, then in silence, then, if you're patient enough, in truth. But truth isn't always gentle. It can take the form of a cabin that vanishes, a door that opens to nowhere, a sound that calls your name when no one else is there. I used to think courage meant not feeling fear, but standing there on that ridge watching the first light spill over the valley, I realized courage isn't about walking through the dark without trembling. It's about trembling anyway and stepping forward. The mountain doesn't reward you for bravery. It humbles you for arrogance. It teaches you that curiosity has a cost. And sometimes the price is never knowing if what you saw was real or if it was meant for you at all. Now, when I tell people this story, I don't try to convince them it happened. I just tell it the way the mountain told it to me. Slow, quiet, without explanation. Because somewhere, maybe right now, someone else is walking through the fog near Mount Mitchell, and they'll see it too. The shape of a roof through the trees, a door slightly open, a chance to step inside something that doesn't belong to time. If that's you, if someday you find yourself standing before a cabin that isn't on any map, with frost on your breath and silence in your chest, remember this. It's not an invitation to enter. It's a question, a mirror. The mountain asking you what you're willing to see and what you're willing to lose to understand it. And if you decide to turn away, don't feel weak. Some truths aren't meant to be witnessed twice. Some memories, like that extra room behind the hearth, vanish by dawn because they're not supposed to follow you home. Still, sometimes when the wind moves through the trees just right, I swear I hear it, the faint creak of a door swinging open somewhere deep in the fog, and though I never look back, I nod to it, because the mountain remembers me, and I remember it. Maybe that's the balance we owe this place, not to conquer it, not to understand it, but to respect the mystery that keeps it breathing. So when you walk into the woods next time, walk softly. Listen deeply. Fear what deserves to be feared, but never run from wonder. Because out there, beyond the safety of your firelight, the wilderness isn't waiting to scare you. It's waiting to teach you. And if you ever wake before dawn and feel the mountain watching, just know it's not looking for you. It's remembering you. It was the kind of silence that makes your heartbeat sound louder than it should, the kind that fills the air when the forest has decided to stop breathing for a moment, just to listen. I remember the night well, because no matter how many times I try to forget, the sound of that cabin shaking still crawls through my sleep like an unwelcome whisper. My name's Daniel Reed, 34 years old at the time, and I'd been camping the Appalachian foothills for years, long enough to know that the woods can be strange, but never cruel. That night taught me otherwise. I'd driven up from Asheville, taking a forgotten logging road that twisted through the ridges like a scar. The cabin wasn't mine. It belonged to an old friend named Malcolm, a retired ranger who swore by solitude. He said he built it to listen to the land. When I arrived, the sun had just melted behind the trees, the whole forest glowing amber before slipping into cold blue shadow. The cabin stood alone at the edge of a clearing, its porch half-eaten by moss, its windows staring blankly into the timberline. Inside, it smelled like cedar and dust. There was a small stove in the corner, a few old photographs nailed crooked on the wall, and a note on the table that said, "If you hear something outside, don't open the door." I thought he was joking. Malcolm had a sense of humor that ran dark. He liked to play up the old mountain legends about ghosts, moonlit spirits, and hunters who walked into the trees but never came back out. I shrugged it off, built a fire, and poured myself a cup of coffee strong enough to burn through the cold. By midnight, the world had fallen into perfect quiet. Not a single branch creaked. Not one leaf trembled. I sat by the window, watching the fog breathe through the pines, and I remember thinking how the forest felt heavier that night. It wasn't peaceful. It was holding its breath. There's something ancient about these mountains, something that moves beneath the soil, patient and deliberate. The locals in town talk about it like it's a presence, not a story. They say the land remembers. Every scream, every burial, every secret, it all sinks into the roots. When the shaking began, it wasn't subtle. The cabin lurched like a ship struck by a wave. My cup fell from the table, shattering against the floor, and I froze. At first, I thought it was an earthquake, but the ground outside didn't tremble. The sound came from the cabin itself, the wood moaning, the nails screeching as if something underneath was trying to crawl out. The fire snapped violently, throwing shadows that twisted across the walls like living things. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped to the door, but before I could reach for the latch, the shaking stopped. Just stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I waited, listening to my pulse thudding in my ears, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps on the porch, slow, heavy, not pacing, not wandering, circling. I turned off the light, crouched near the window, and held my breath. The moon had pushed through the clouds, and in that pale light I could see a faint shape moving just beyond the glass. It wasn't human, not in the way it moved. It shifted weight like something trying to remember how to stand upright, Every instinct in me screamed to make a sound, to shout, to do anything. But I couldn't. The handle on the door twitched. Once, twice, then stopped. Whoever or whatever it was, it knew I was inside. When the cabin shook again, it was harder. Violent. Plates fell from the shelf, the old photos tore from the walls, and I could hear the beams groaning under pressure. I thought it was going to collapse. I stumbled to the stove, grabbed the iron poker, and pressed myself into the corner. But what terrified me most wasn't the shaking, it was what I realized next. The sound wasn't just the cabin, it was the trees. I could hear them creaking in unison, bending though there was no wind, their branches scraping against each other like bones. The whole forest seemed to move as one, and I swear, it felt like something beneath the earth was shifting. The shaking came again, more violent, more desperate, and then just as suddenly as it began, it was gone. For a long time I didn't move, I didn't dare. When I finally did, I stepped outside onto the porch. The air was freezing, and the fog had thickened so much that my flashlight could barely cut through it. The forest was absolutely still. The ground, the trees, the sky, all unmoving. But the strangest part was the cabin itself. The foundation stones had shifted. The wood along the back wall had split clean down the center as if pulled apart by invisible hands. There were no footprints in the mud, no sign of an animal, no sign of anything. I walked around to the far side of the cabin, and that's when I saw it. About 10 feet from the wall, the earth had cracked open, a thin, dark line running straight through the clearing like a wound. Steam drifted from it, faint but real, curling into the night. I knelt beside it, reaching out, and the air above that crack was warmer than the rest of the forest. Not natural warmth. Something deeper. Ancient. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with the fire poker in my hand, staring at that line in the earth until dawn broke. The shaking never came back, but every few minutes I'd hear faint echoes, like distant knocking from underground. When the sun finally rose, I packed my things, left the key on the table, and drove away without looking back. Later that week, I tried to call Malcolm, but the number was disconnected. A few days after, I went back to the local ranger station and asked if they'd heard from him. The ranger looked confused and said, "Malcolm? He passed 3 years ago. Stroke. There's no cabin up there anymore. It burned down last winter." For a long while, I thought maybe I was losing my mind. Maybe I'd been at the wrong ridge. Maybe exhaustion played tricks on me. But 2 months later, I went back. The clearing was there, overgrown with grass and blackberry thickets. No cabin, no foundation stones, just the faint outline of where it had stood. But the crack in the earth, that was still there. Narrower now, almost hidden beneath the roots. When I knelt beside it again, I could hear it. Soft, almost imperceptible, a steady rhythm like breathing, like something alive beneath the ground. I learned something that night. Some places aren't meant to be revisited, and some silences aren't meant to be broken. The Appalachian woods don't scream. They don't roar. They whisper. And if you stay long enough, if you listen too closely, you might start to understand what they're saying. You see, the mountains hold more than stone and timber. They hold memory. They remember every life that walked their trails, every death that fell beneath their branches. And sometimes when the night is too calm, when the fog lies too still, that memory stirs. That's what I felt at 1:52 a.m. That's what shook the cabin. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal. It was the land itself remembering. And if you ever find yourself deep in those foothills, sitting by your fire, and the world suddenly goes silent, listen carefully, because silence out there doesn't mean peace. It means you've been noticed. I didn't talk about it for months, not to friends, not to anyone on the trail. The story of that night lived inside me like an ember that refused to die. Every time I tried to explain it, the words came out wrong, like describing a shadow to someone who's never seen the dark. But the thing about silence, real silence, is that it doesn't stay empty. It starts to echo. The more I hiked, the more the mountains began to feel different. Not menacing, just aware. I'd camped miles from where that cabin once stood, but every night carried the same strange tension. The forest would hum, not with crickets or wind, but with something deeper, a vibration you could feel in your bones like the heartbeat of the land. I started noticing signs too, subtle things, small stacks of stones left in perfect spirals near my tent, carvings on trees that weren't there the night before, rough symbols, almost like tally marks. I once woke to find my compass spinning endlessly, refusing to settle. These weren't coincidences. Not out here. The Appalachians are old, older than we have the language to describe, and the people who lived here first, they warned about places like this. They said the earth beneath these ridges never forgot what was taken from it. One evening while I was refilling my canteen near a creek, I met an old man fishing alone. His clothes were worn, his hands calloused, and his eyes had the kind of quiet that comes from years of listening instead of talking. He asked where I was camping, and when I told him, he froze. "You shouldn't sleep up there," he said. "That ground moves." I told him what I'd seen, the shaking cabin, the crack in the earth, the sound beneath it. He didn't laugh, didn't call me crazy. He just nodded slowly and said, "That's where the ridge breathes." I asked what that meant, but he only looked toward the tree line and said, "Some places aren't made for houses. The land remembers what it used to be." That night, I couldn't get his words out of my head. When I set up camp, I kept the fire small, the light low. The wind whispered through the pines, carrying voices I couldn't quite place, soft, rhythmic, almost like chanting from somewhere deep between the hills. And when I lay down, I felt it again, the faint tremor beneath the soil, subtle at first, like the earth was shifting its weight. At 1:52 a.m., the same time as before, it came again. Not as violent, but unmistakable. The ground trembled beneath me. My lantern rattled, my breath caught in my chest, and from the darkness came a low groaning sound, as if something massive was exhaling beneath the ridge. I scrambled out of the tent, flashlight in hand, and saw the same thing as before. Trees swaying though there was no wind. The forest itself breathing. But this time I saw something else. Down the slope, where the fog pooled thick like smoke, faint lights moved between the trees. Not flashlights, not fireflies, more like small floating embers, glowing orange-red and pulsing with the same rhythm as the earth's tremor. They weaved through the trunks, slow and deliberate, circling the spot where I stood. I should have run. Every instinct in me screamed to pack my gear and leave, but I couldn't move. The fear wasn't sharp, it was heavy, ancient, like standing before something sacred and forbidden. The lights drew closer, and for a brief moment I heard voices, faint, layered, distant, hundreds of them whispering at once, rising and falling like waves. I couldn't make out words, just emotion, grief, anger, memory. Then, as suddenly as it began, the lights vanished. The forest went still again, the tremor faded, leaving only silence and the thudding of my own heartbeat. When dawn came, the campsite was untouched, no footprints, no lights, no marks on the ground. But near the edge of the clearing, carved into the soil where my tent had been, was a single line, like a miniature version of the crack I'd seen by the cabin. I didn't touch it. I just stared. That's when it hit me. Whatever happened at Malcolm's cabin wasn't isolated. The shaking, the breathing earth, the lights, they were all connected. Something beneath these mountains wasn't sleeping. It was remembering. Maybe it wasn't just the land holding on to the past. Maybe it was the past trying to come back up. When I finally left those foothills for good, I promised myself I'd never camp there again. But even now, years later, I can still feel it. Sometimes, when I'm far from the mountains, I'll wake in the middle of the night to a faint vibration in the floorboards. Or I'll dream of the forest, still, silent, waiting. I've come to believe the shaking wasn't a warning. It was a reminder. These mountains have seen more life and death than any of us could ever comprehend. And the deeper you go, the closer you get to what's buried beneath all that memory. People ask why I still tell this story, why I bring up the night the cabin shook, why I can't just let it go. It's because I think we forget how alive the world really is. We build on it, cut through it, light fires on top of it, and assume it's just dirt. But the earth isn't just a place we stand, it's something that listens. It feels every step, every whisper, every trespass. That night, the land was speaking, and I wasn't supposed to hear it. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can still feel the rhythm of that breathing earth, slow, deliberate, ancient. And somewhere deep down, I know it hasn't stopped. Because out there, beneath the roots and the rivers, beneath the bones and the stories we've forgotten, the mountains are still moving, waiting, remembering. I think about that night often, not out of fear anymore, but out of respect. When you've seen the land move, when you've felt it breathe beneath your feet, you start to realize how small you are, how fragile the line is between what we understand and what we don't. People go into the woods thinking they're escaping the noise of the world, but the truth is, they're walking into something older, quieter, and infinitely more aware. The wilderness doesn't need to shout to make itself known. It waits. It watches. It lets you wander deep enough to forget you're a visitor, and that's when you start to hear it, the hum beneath everything, the pulse of stone and soil, the sound of time itself breathing through the trees. That night in the cabin, I thought the shaking was something evil, something meant to scare me out. But maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was the opposite. Maybe the mountain was trying to remind me that nothing built by our hands truly belongs here. Not cabins, not roads, not names carved into bark. Out there, we're just guests passing through an ancient memory that never ends. When I finally told a friend, someone who grew up near those same foothills, he didn't laugh. He said the elders used to tell stories about places where the ground remembers grief. They believed that when enough blood was spilled, when enough sorrow sank into the soil, the mountain would take it, hold it, and every few generations it would stir, trying to give it back. It made sense in a way. Those ridges have seen centuries of struggle. Settlers, battles, disappearances, people vanishing into the fog without a trace. What if the shaking wasn't the earth breaking apart, but opening, just for a moment, to release what it had carried too long? Sometimes when I think back to the sound, to the way the wood of that cabin groaned and the ground trembled beneath me, I can almost feel a strange kind of sorrow in it, like the mountain wasn't angry, it was grieving, mourning everything it had swallowed in silence. And I think that's what scared me most. Not the idea of monsters or spirits or curses, but the realization that the land feels, that it has a kind of memory too deep for us to ever understand. That somewhere beneath the soil, something ancient and tired is still remembering every story we've buried. I used to love camping for the peace, for the way the woods made me feel alive, free, untouched by the world's noise. But now, I go with a different heart. I tread lighter. I whisper thank you to the trees. I make fires small and leave nothing behind. Because I know now that every sound echoes, every footprint lingers. And sometimes, on still nights when the fog rolls through the valleys and the stars fade behind the mist, I hear it again, the faint trembling beneath the ground. Not enough to shake the world, just enough to remind me it's there. Watching, listening, waiting. If you ever find yourself in those Appalachian foothills, far from the roads and the lights, and the night grows too still, pay attention. If the wind dies and the crickets fall silent, don't move right away. Don't speak. Just listen, because that silence isn't emptiness, it's presence. It's the mountain turning its gaze toward you. And if you ever feel the ground hum softly beneath your boots, don't panic, don't run. Stand still. Let it pass through you. That's the land remembering your step, marking your place in its endless memory. I think that's what I learned that night. That we don't walk on dead ground, we walk on something living, something vast and ancient, that carries the weight of every story, every loss, every heartbeat that's ever touched it. And maybe, just maybe, the cabin didn't shake to frighten me. Maybe it shook to wake me, to remind me that the forest doesn't just surround us. It holds us, watches us, learns from us. The next time you go camping deep in the mountains, remember this. It's not just you out there. The ground beneath your feet is listening. The trees are listening. The silence is listening. And if, in the middle of the night, your cabin begins to tremble and the air turns thick with stillness, don't think of it as danger. Think of it as the heartbeat of the mountain itself, stirring in its sleep, letting you know that you've been heard. Because in those moments, between the fear and the awe, between what's real and what's remembered, that's where the wilderness speaks. And all it asks of you is this: to listen. I remember the way the fog clung to the trees that night, like the forest itself was trying to hide something. It was late October, the air thin and bitter, the kind that bites at your lungs and makes your breath visible in the glow of your headlamp. My name's Ethan Cole, 33 years old, a weekend wanderer with more curiosity than sense, and that night, I learned that curiosity can dig a grave deeper than fear ever could. I had been hiking the Allegheny backcountry for 2 days, chasing solitude the way some men chase storms. My plan was simple: find a quiet spot near the old timberline, pitch my tent, and spend the night under the stars before heading down to the valley by morning. The woods were hushed in that eerie Appalachian way. No wind, no rustle, no sound but my boots on damp leaves and the slow drip of melting frost from the branches above. That silence always feels like peace at first, until you realize it's the kind of peace that comes before something happens. By nightfall, I found a clearing beside an overgrown path that wasn't on any map I'd studied. I'd checked twice. It was wide enough for a small cabin with old stumps surrounding it like broken teeth. I thought about setting up camp there, but something in me hesitated. The ground felt wrong, uneven. It gave slightly under my boots, like something hollow was beneath. But night doesn't wait for your doubts, and the cold was starting to settle deep into my bones. So I pitched the tent, started a small fire, and cooked what little I had left, a packet of instant rice and some jerky. It was quiet enough to hear the firewood crackle and the faint trickle of water somewhere in the dark. Around 10 p.m., I noticed the fog again. It rolled in thick, swallowing the tree line until I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. The air grew heavy, damp, almost electric. That's when I heard it, a faint creak, somewhere beyond the veil of white. At first I thought it was just a branch shifting in the cold, but then it came again, a low, dragging groan, wood on wood, a door, opening. I killed the fire. Every instinct in me screamed to stay quiet. I knelt by the embers, heart hammering against my ribs. And through the fog, I saw it, the faintest glow of light. A window, maybe 100 yards away. The cabin. I could have sworn it wasn't there earlier. Most people would have stayed put. But not me. I wish I could say it was bravery that made me move, but it was something else. A strange pull like the woods themselves wanted me to see what was behind that light. I grabbed my flashlight, kept it low, and followed the faint path through the fog. The ground turned muddy, slick, with something that smelled like rot. I stepped over fallen logs, brushed through low branches, and then there it was. The cabin stood crooked against the slope, its roof sagging under years of moss and decay. The door hung open, swaying gently in the wind that had finally decided to show up. The light inside flickered, not steady like a bulb, but uneven, like a flame struggling to stay alive. I called out just once. My voice barely made it through the air. No answer. I took a step closer. The smell hit me first. Stale wood, damp earth, and something else. Something metallic, like rusted iron. Inside, the place was nearly empty. 1 table, 2 chairs, and a small iron stove in the corner. A lantern burned weakly beside a cracked window, its flame dancing low. The walls were carved with markings, deep, uneven scratches running in circles, almost symbols, though I couldn't tell if they were written by a hand or claw. I stepped forward, careful, scanning the floorboards. That's when I heard it, a sound from beneath me, faint but unmistakable, breathing, slow, shallow, coming from under the cabin floor. I froze. Every nerve in my body screamed to move, to run, to do something. But I couldn't. I just stood there, flashlight trembling in my hand. The breathing grew louder, heavier, until it turned into something else. A low moan that seemed to vibrate through the boards. Then came the first scream. It tore through the cabin like a knife through bone, raw, human, and filled with something I can't describe. It wasn't pain. It wasn't anger. It was the sound of someone begging without words. I stumbled back, hit the doorframe, and fell into the dirt outside. My light went out. The fog swallowed everything. I scrambled to find my bearings, my tent, anything that wasn't this place. But the woods were different now. Twisted, the path gone. All I could hear was that sound echoing through the trees. I ran. I don't know how far or how long. My lungs burned, and my legs felt like they were moving through water. I didn't stop until I reached a ridge I didn't recognize, the forest stretching below like a black ocean. I turned back only once, and I swear I saw that same weak light still burning in the fog, unmoved, unchanged. The screams had stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I made it through the night by some miracle, curled under a fallen log with my knife in hand, waiting for daylight. When morning came, I retraced my steps. But there was no clearing, no cabin, no sign I had ever been there, just untouched forest and the faint smell of wet ash. Later that week, I told a park ranger what I'd seen. He looked at me for a long moment before saying anything. Then he said quietly, "You must have camped near where the McAllister homestead used to stand." I asked what that meant. He told me the story about a family that vanished up there in 1974. Locals claimed they heard screams in the woods for weeks after. Search teams found the remains of the cabin, but no bodies. Only claw marks. Deep ones. As if someone had tried to dig their way out from beneath the floorboards. That night I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard that sound again, that scream from beneath the floor. I started reading about the Alleghenies, the old folklore, the things people say dwell deep in those woods. Some say the land remembers what's buried in it. Others believe certain places are cursed, not by spirits, but by memory, by the pain soaked into the soil long after life leaves it. And maybe that's the truth of it. Maybe the cabin was never really gone. Maybe it just waits for fog, for dark, for someone curious enough to follow the light when they should have stayed by the fire. Because I'll tell you this, when I hike now and the night grows still, when the wind dies and the forest holds its breath, I never ignore that silence anymore. I know what waits behind it. And every time the fog begins to rise, I pack my things, douse the fire, and move on. Because somewhere out there, in those hills that never forget, a cabin still stands at 2:18 a.m. And if you listen close enough, you might still hear what it's hiding. I didn't hike for months after that night. Every time I saw a tree line disappear into fog, something inside me recoiled. The woods had always been my sanctuary, a place where the noise of the world faded and I could feel something pure, something true. But after that night, the forest wasn't quiet anymore. It was listening. And I couldn't bear the thought of what might listen back. But time changes things. The mind, when haunted, looks for understanding the way a wound looks for air. So I went back, not to the Alleghenies, not to that ridge, but to another trail miles away near Spruce Knob. The air was thin and sharp, the kind that clears your thoughts if you let it. The first night there, I didn't sleep in a tent. I sat by the fire and listened to the forest breathe. It's strange. Once you've heard a scream in the dark, you never forget the silence that comes after it. It's not peaceful. It's hollow. Like the world itself is holding its breath, waiting to see what you'll do next. And I realized something sitting there, alone with the firelight trembling against the pines. Fear doesn't always come from what's around us. Sometimes it's buried inside us, the parts of ourselves we never face until the woods strip everything else away. Out there you have no distractions, no noise, no people to tell you who you are. It's just you and what you carry. Maybe that's why I was drawn to that cabin in the first place. Maybe the scream wasn't just from something beneath those floorboards. Maybe it was something inside me, clawing to get out. A memory I'd buried so deep I didn't even recognize its voice. See, I wasn't just hiking for the thrill back then. I was running. From routine. From a job that made me forget who I was. From a life that felt smaller every year. I told myself the woods would give me freedom, but I was still dragging my ghosts behind me like chains. Out there, there's nowhere to hide them. The forest doesn't care who you are. It only mirrors what you bring. That's the thing people never talk about when they romanticize the wilderness. Nature isn't kind, it's honest, brutally, unflinchingly honest. When you walk deep enough into it, it peels back everything false until all that's left is what's real. Sometimes that truth is beautiful. A sunrise bleeding through the fog, the sound of a stream threading through stones, and sometimes it's unbearable, a scream in the night that reminds you just how fragile it all is. Weeks later, I spoke again with the same ranger who'd told me about the McAllisters. He said people still hear things up there. Not often, but enough. He said the screams usually come right before a storm, right when the fog rolls in. But he also told me something else. The mountain keeps what it wants, he said. Sometimes that's bones, sometimes it's memories. That line stuck with me, because maybe that's what the Alleghenies are, a place that remembers too much. Every hiker who vanished, every cry that went unanswered, every ounce of fear that soaked into the ground, it all lingers. Maybe the screams I heard weren't from the dead, but from the weight of what the living leave behind. I went back one last time, almost a year later. I don't know what I expected to find, closure maybe, or proof that it all really happened. The fog was thinner that night, the air colder, sharper. I followed my old trail step for step, but the clearing was gone. Just endless trees, moss-covered stumps, and the whisper of leaves underfoot. And yet, as I stood there, the wind shifted. It carried something faint. Not a scream, not this time, but a sound like breathing. Soft, steady, beneath the earth. I didn't run. I didn't even move. I just listened. And for the first time, I felt no fear. Because maybe the forest wasn't warning me. Maybe it was reminding me that everything buried eventually finds its way to the surface, that what haunts us isn't meant to be silenced, but understood. When I finally left the mountains that morning, the world seemed clearer. The sun broke over the ridges and the fog thinned into light. I realized I'd been looking for something all along. Not an answer, but acceptance. That some mysteries don't need solving. Some stories are meant to stay unfinished. Because when you've stood in a place where the earth itself screams, you stop needing every sound to make sense. You start to understand that the wild doesn't owe you clarity. It only offers reflection. And if you listen long enough, you begin to hear the truth in its chaos, that fear isn't the opposite of courage. It's the beginning of it. I still hike, still camp, still chase the quiet. But I do it differently now. I don't go looking for peace. I go to face what's out there. The darkness, the echoes, the reminders that we're not separate from nature's mysteries. We're part of them. The forest doesn't frighten me anymore. It humbles me. It reminds me that we all carry our own abandoned cabins, those places inside us we avoid because we're afraid of what we might hear if we go inside. But maybe the only way out is through. So if you ever find yourself deep in those Appalachian woods and the fog begins to rise around you, don't run, don't speak, just listen. You might hear the forest breathing, or the faint groan of a door swinging open somewhere you can't see, and maybe, just maybe, you'll understand what I did. That the loudest screams in the wilderness don't always come from the ghosts that haunt it. Sometimes they come from the ones we carry within. The woods have a way of teaching lessons no man can forget. Not through words, not through warnings, but through moments that brand themselves into the marrow of your bones. That night in the Alleghenies, it was more than a story. It was a reckoning. A whisper from something older than language, reminding me that we are visitors here. Brief flickers of life wandering through a place that has existed long before us and will remain long after we're gone. Every creak of the pines, every shiver in the fog, every scream carried through the trees, it all tells a story of presence, of boundaries, of respect. I used to think fear was something to overcome, that if I could face the darkest corners of the forest without trembling, I'd somehow earn the right to belong there. But the truth is simpler and heavier. You don't conquer the wilderness. You earn the silence it offers you. You move through it like a guest in a cathedral, speaking softly, touching nothing that doesn't belong to you. The forest isn't cruel. It's honest. It gives you what you bring into it, your fears, your pride, your grief. And in return, it shows you the reflection of those things, magnified and untamed. When I heard those screams beneath the cabin floor, I thought I'd stumbled upon something supernatural. Maybe I did. But what terrified me most wasn't what I heard, it was what I recognized in it. A voice stripped bare of all control, the sound of helplessness, the one thing every human shares when the dark finally looks back at them. For months after, I tried to rationalize it. I searched records, spoke to locals, even visited the historical archives. The McAllisters were real. The cabin was real. The screams, they were never explained. Some blamed it on wild animals trapped beneath rotted beams. Others said the soil shifted over a sinkhole, releasing trapped air that mimicked a voice. Science has a way of softening things we don't understand, but no theory can explain the feeling of being watched by something ancient, something patient, something that doesn't need to be seen to be known. And that's when I understood the danger of the wild isn't in what hides out there. It's in forgetting that we are not the main characters in its story. The mountain doesn't bend for us. The forest doesn't care about our comfort or our courage. It simply exists. It observes. And sometimes when we push too far, it answers. Not out of malice, but as a reminder. Now, when I camp, I still feel it. That weight, that unseen awareness pressing through the branches. It's not threatening anymore. It's humbling. Because I know now that survival isn't about strength. It's about respect. Every time you light a fire, you're asking permission from a land that remembers the mistakes of those who came before. Every echo that carries through the hollow of night is a warning, not to scare you away, but to keep you awake. And maybe that's what those screams were. Not the cries of something trapped, but the mountain's way of reminding anyone who listens that every trail has a cost. That every whisper of wind and shift of soil carries the memory of those who didn't listen. So if you ever find yourself in the deep spine of the Alleghenies and the air begins to thicken around 2 a.m., listen carefully. You might hear a sound that chills you to the core, something too human to be animal, too lost to be explained. If you do, don't look for it. Don't run. Just stand still and remember this. Some places don't want to be found. Some stories aren't meant to be understood. They're meant to be felt, because the woods, they don't need to scare you to command your respect. They just need to remind you that you are small and that somewhere beneath the roots and the rot, the mountain is still breathing, waiting for the next curious soul who forgets what kind of world they've stepped into. So keep your fire small, keep your heart quiet. And if the forest ever falls silent all at once, if the wind stops, if even the insects hold their breath, know that you're not alone. Something ancient is listening, watching, waiting. And when the clock strikes 2:18 a.m., remember my story. Not as a warning, but as a truth. The wilderness doesn't haunt you. It reveals you.